Now, for more on China's Belt and Road Initiative, Robb Koepp joins us live from Hong Kong. He's director of the Economist Corporate Network. So, Rob, President Xi Jinping has invited British Prime Minister Theresa May, among others, to the upcoming One Belt, One Road Forum in Beijing in May. What are the expectations for this event?
Well, I think from leaders like Mrs. May, there's a lot of expectation regarding how much China is going to invest, either in their country or in projects they're involved with. The UK is a little bit of an exception to the typical One Belt, One Road country in that while it needs infrastructure, it's also a very active infrastructure builder itself. But it's a big question of money, really, from the countries outside of China. For China, it's the sort of deals they're going to get, both in terms of the returns, because these aren't aid packages, by the way. I think that's something that's often ignored. They're loan packages and PPP, private-public partnership projects. But anyway, China's looking for a return on this investment. It's also looking for a return in terms of influence.
So let's look at the progress we've seen so far. What are some of the key developments we've seen in the Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, one project I spent some time looking at, we issued a report on this last year looking at a variety of Belt Road projects across the globe. The standard gauge rail in Kenya, in fact, an anchor project for China's ambitions in Africa. It should be completed by May. Curious timing with the upcoming summit. So, you know, it's made progress in that area, particularly with infrastructure regarding transportation in Africa, also with mining. It's made some very significant investments in energy sector in places like Malaysia. In Sri Lanka, a port project, which is of great strategic importance to China. So there are a number of projects that have sprung up since 2013 when President Xi Jinping first announced the One Belt, One Road initiative.
Now, with China's huge investment, and you have other participating governments and organizations, what are we looking at potentially in terms of the size and scope of investment from participating countries?
Well, it really varies between location, but these are multi-billion-dollar projects, put it that way. There are some smaller ones. I've seen certain projects that are tens of millions. So that's kind of an interesting component to this. There's almost no project too large or too small for Belt Road. China is very interested in branching out. And like I said, it's in various ways. One way is it generally, or genuinely, I should say, has an issue in wanting to in needing to expand its overcapacity industries, okay? So these construction-related activities, construction firms themselves have an overabundance of employment. Projects have already built out in China, so it really needs to take this prowess it's developed and bring that abroad. Now, that has good and bad components to it, but the good component is there are a lot of countries needing infrastructure, and that's that classic, as the Chinese like to say, win-win scenario here. There are a lot of countries that need infrastructure. China has now tapped out pretty much its infrastructure needs, so it's wanting to take that abroad. So there's all this emphasis, and there's really, you know, any variety of project can fit within One Belt, One Road as long as the Chinese consider it viable.
Now, getting so many different countries on board and tying their economic fates together for One Belt, One Road, how much concern is there over things like rising trade protectionism and lackluster global growth?
I would say there's almost less concern about that. It's more towards what the previous segment referred to in places like Thailand, where the deal terms weren't considered favorable. I think there's actually more concern from recipient countries about China not always giving the best terms of trade. Now, in terms of protectionism, which is of concern for China and its #1 trading partner, the U.S., that's, of course, quite relevant on the global stage generally, but that isn't something that really impacts One Belt, One Road. In fact, you could argue with the U.S. Pulling back, it's giving more of an opportunity for One Belt, One Road. So particularly, I think, a country like Mexico, which isn't, I believe, officially on the Belt Road map, but it would definitely fit with these sorts of projects. And there has been Chinese infrastructure investment in Mexico, certainly, especially in the area of high-speed rail. So you could almost argue that protectionism is a good thing for Belt Road.
Now, let's also look at some challenges. What sort of threat could, say, security issues that are linked to some countries along the route, for example, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, what impact could that, do you think, have on the success of Belt and Road?
Yeah. I think it's a very significant potential threat. you know, you mentioned Pakistan. That's one example. Another example would be something like Sri Lanka, where the Sri Lankans have been rather welcoming. Overall, there's been some controversy with changing governments involving projects with Sri Lanka. But Sri Lanka likes to have China as a partner vis-a-vis India. But India doesn't so much like China going into Sri Lanka. So there are other broader security concerns. Specific for China, though, like you mentioned, Pakistan is one. I would say there are also long-term potential security issues in places like Indonesia, which has had a sometimes fraught relationship with China. Other parts of Central Asia, where it's, you know, the Central Asian nations are balancing the interest of Russia and China, which are currently on good terms, but still have their own strategic goals.
Well, it's definitely a balancing act all the countries involved will have to deal with. Thank you so much, Rob Koepp of the Economist Corporate Network.